pastor here at Queen Street United Methodist Church in downtown Kinston, North Carolina. Welcome to our Wesley Bible class. We are finally putting an end to Joshua, both class-wise and literally. But today we're doing chapter 24, the final chapter of Joshua, before we get into Judges. But before I get into that, we have a wonderful opportunity for you who are watching us online, especially if you are local, because next week, instead of class, we are going to have a brunch here at the church. And we're all supposed to invite someone, it's a +1 to invite people to come to the brunch. And since we have like 200 people watching this class, I want to invite all 200 of you to come to our brunch at 10 o'clock next Sunday and join us for worship. Our choir is going to start to sing again, and we're really looking forward to a great service. But we just want you to feel at home and to see who we are and what we're like. Just take a look at us. We are more than this Bible class, and I just want you to feel welcome, okay? So if you have an opportunity to come on out next Sunday at 10 o'clock, then come join us and we'll feed you. Looking forward to seeing you like you've been looking to see me. Okay, chapter 24. Chapter 24, Joshua, is it's a final chapter of a book, and it is written in the same style as the final chapters of the Pentateuch books. The final chapter of Joshua is a historical review and a challenge not to forget our past, not to abandon the Lord, to be faithful when we get settled. And I think that's a big deal, because when people tend to get settled, they tend to forget the Lord. So that's what's going on. So let's see what the words of Joshua are. Then Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel to Shechem, and then Shechem is where the tabernacle was. And some of the elders, the heads, the judges, the officers of Israel, and they presented themselves before God. And Joshua said to all the people, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, long ago your ancestors, Terah and his sons Abraham and Nahor, lived beyond the Euphrates and served other gods. I have been to where Abraham came from. It is called Ur of the Chaldees. And there I was in Iraq, and I'm coming down this big road like an interstate, and right off there is a big sign that says Ur and Nineveh." Okay, so that stuff's still around. Okay, just want you to know. Okay, then I took your father Abraham from beyond the river and led him through all the land of Canaan and made his offspring many. I gave him Isaac, and to Isaac I gave Jacob, and Esau I gave Esau the hill country of Seir to possess. But Jacob and his children went down to Egypt. Then I sent Moses and Aaron, and I plagued Egypt with what I did in its midst, and afterwards I brought you out. When I brought your ancestors out of Egypt, you came to the sea, and the Egyptians pursued your ancestors with chariots and horsemen to the Red Sea. When they cried out to the Lord, he put darkness between you and the Egyptians and made the sea come upon them and cover them, and your eyes saw what I did to Egypt. Your eyes. Now see, this is interesting because this is like generations later, okay? So they're putting the history in a first-person context. And when the Jews celebrate Passover and they recount their history, they say, "We were slaves in Egypt." Okay, they do a first-person plural on their history, which puts them in the midst of what their ancestors went through. Okay, afterward you lived in the wilderness a long time. Then I brought you to the land of the Amorites, who lived on the other side of the Jordan, and they fought with you. And I handed them over to you and took possession of their land, and I destroyed them before you. Then King Balak of Zippor of Moab set out to fight against Israel. He sent and invited Balaam, son of Beor, to curse you. Balaam, remember, was a pagan prophet whose donkey had harsh words for him and told him not to curse the people. And Balaam decided not to curse the people, but instead to bless them. I won't say where prophets often talk out of, but anyway. There's, but I would not listen to Balaam, therefore he blessed you, and so I rescued you out of his hand. And what did they do to Balaam? Well, when they invaded Balaam's territory, they killed him, okay? When you went over the Jordan and came to Jericho, the citizens of Jericho fought against you, as well as the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, and I handed them over to you. I sent swarms of hornets ahead of you that drove out before you the 2 kings of the Amorites. It was not by your sword or by your bow. I gave you a land on which you had not labored, and towns that you had not built, and you live in them. You eat the fruit of vineyards and olive yards that you did not plant. Okay, so God is taking the credit for everything. Okay, God's taking the credit for everything. And yeah, you can say that the people can say God was with us, okay? But, you know, if I was one of the guys out there putting my life on the line and drawing the sword and doing the Lord's work, you'd think he'd give me a little credit, you know? Just a little credit, but no, God takes all the credit for everything that happens to these people. And Joshua is glad to give it to him. Now therefore revere the Lord and serve him in sincerity and faithfulness. Put away the gods that your ancestors served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. Now if you are unwilling to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will. This is when Sunday school, when Joshua is taught in Sunday school, okay, there is the Battle of Jericho, and then they skip to the last chapter, and this is the thing that you see, and you see it in plaques on the wall, okay. These words from Joshua are the most memorable. Now, if you are unwilling to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. Okay? You all remember that? Yep, there it is. Okay? Now you know where it came from. Then the people answered, far be it from us that we should forsake the Lord and serve other gods. For it is the Lord our God who brought us and our ancestors from the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, and who did great signs in our sight. He protected us along the way that we went among all the peoples through whom we passed. And the Lord drove out before us all the peoples, the Amorites who lived in the land. Therefore we also will serve the Lord, for he is our God. And so much for solemn vows. Okay, and, you know, I've performed many weddings and I've heard lots of solemn vows. Okay, batting average isn't so great. Okay. Just want you to know, and you need to watch those solemn vows, okay, when you start making solemn, and the Bible tells us, be careful that when you make a vow, because God's going to hold you to it, all right? But Joshua said to the people, you cannot serve the Lord, for he is a holy God, he is a jealous God, he will not forgive your transgressions or your sins. See where there needs to be a transition somewhere from the Old Testament to the New? God will not forgive your sins, okay? What do we find in the New Testament? Oh, yes, he will. All right? If you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods, then he will turn and do harm and consume you after having done you good. And the people said to Joshua, no, we will serve the Lord. Then Joshua said to the people, you are witnesses against yourselves that you have chosen the Lord to serve him. And they said, we are witnesses. He said, then put away the foreign gods that are among you and incline your hearts to the Lord, the God of Israel. They're already violating it. Why do they have foreign gods among them? Okay? Thinking, you know, they're already blowing it. Right at that point. The people said to Joshua, the Lord our God will serve, we will serve him, and him we will obey. So Joshua made a covenant with the people that day and made statutes and ordinances for them at Shechem. Joshua wrote these words in the book of the law of God, and he took a large stone and set it up there under the oak of the sanctuary of the Lord. Joshua said to all the people, see, this stone shall be a witness against us, for we have heard all the words of the Lord that he spoke to us. Therefore it shall be a witness against you if you deal falsely with your God. So Joshua sent the people away to their inheritances. Okay. Monuments. Monuments are reminders. We are having a huge controversy. It's going through the courts and everything on whether or not you can put the 10 Commandments in classrooms. The same 10 Commandments that are on the wall of the Supreme Court. Okay? How hard is this to figure out? But it's a controversy, and the controversy is whether or not people, we founded this country on Judeo-Christian principles, and it's whether or not the people of this country have decided that they don't need Judeo-Christian principles. So the same kind of question that's being put to these people as they settle in their land is the same question that we face today. And we're having a Supreme Court decide for each one of us, or for schools, whether or not Judeo-Christian principles can be taught as part of our national heritage, which it is. Okay? Now there are those who don't like Judeo-Christian principles because they are neither Judeo or Christian. Okay? They are another faith that you would think had some of this in there as a foundation of their own belief. And yet they would not want it posted on the walls of a school. Okay? And then you have others who are anti-religion, period, who think that their freedom not to be religious is something that needs to be imposed upon everybody else. So what we're looking at is whether or not this country is deciding to become entirely secular. Now, what societies are entirely secular? Or claim to be? Which societies claim to be entirely secular? Communist. Okay? They're not, because they've substituted another religion. If you go to North Korea, Kim Jong-un is a god. Okay? So, and Hitler was a god. Hitler had crosses removed from the altars of churches and a portrait of himself placed on the altars of churches, Germany. Okay? So, this idea of becoming entirely secular is very dangerous. And also the concept that another religion that believes that people need to be converted by force is another threat. Okay? Now we're looking at the Judeo part of our Judeo-Christian heritage that we see in the Pentateuch, and we're seeing a tremendous amount of abuse that's going on in the process of enforcing a religion. Those who are not part of that religion are to be slaughtered. Those who are in the religion, if they don't follow it, are to be slaughtered. So we're not talking about a religion where free choice is necessarily a component part of it, although Joshua is presenting a choice to the people. Okay? So there is the provision that you could have a choice. But if you make the wrong one, God's going to whack you. Okay? God isn't going to forgive you. So what we're seeing is something that, if we're following through with this tradition and our understanding of God, something about our perception of God has got to change in order for us to get to where we are. Where we become a religion that recognizes the dignity and the sanctity of all life, not just the ones who agree with us. Okay? And then the objective becomes, how do you convince somebody to agree with you? And you have to use a kinder, gentler method. Okay? Now, is that a blanket condemnation of these people? No. We're looking at a culture and a society that is, compared to our own, primitive. And compared to what society will become, we may be looking pretty primitive too, okay? But, and I'm hoping that's the case. I'm hoping that with all the flaws that we have going on in our society, that some of these things are generally resolved, okay? And resolved for the better. I pray, thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. That's what I'm looking for, okay? It ain't here yet. Anybody who looks around knows it ain't here yet. But I'm hoping that we get closer to that and that people look back on us and see stupidity, okay, and intolerance, and see that we're trying to get past it, but we haven't. Now, the human condition, I don't think, has changed much from the time of the Old Testament. So we're still going to have these issues, and generations to come are going to have these issues too. And each one of them is going to have to resolve it one way or the other. Joshua says, as for me and my household, I'll serve the Lord. Okay, and you know, I think that's a good thing to say. I wouldn't serve the Lord the way Joshua did, okay, but still the aspiration to serve the Lord is a good one. And as we come to understand the Lord better, especially through the teachings of Christ, in my mind, it just makes a lot more sense to try and serve the Lord. Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and finish this chapter, and then we'll get into a further discussion. After these things, Joshua son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died, being 110 years old. They buried him in his own inheritance at Timnath Serah, which is in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gaash. Gosh, is that where he was married? Okay. Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua and had known all the work that the Lord did for Israel. The bones of Joseph, which the Israelites had brought up from Egypt, were buried at Shechem, in the portion of ground that Jacob had bought from the children of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 pieces of money. It became an inheritance of the descendants of Joseph. Eleazar, son of Aaron, died, and they buried him at Gibeah, the town of his son Phinehas, which had been given him in the hill country of Ephraim. All right. So what we're looking at, we're about to go through a large transition. And we're not going to have class next week, but after that we're going to get into Judges. Okay? There is a huge transition from this period of Israel's history into the time of the Judges. And one of the things that is lacking in the time of the Judges is any kind of strong central government. There is no primary leader. All of the leaders in Judges are tribal. They are warlords, and they're independent of each other, and they're independent of the nation. And the only thing that kind of gels them is the work of the priests and the Levites. But the priests and the Levites, the high priest has a tremendous amount of authority. Okay? But you don't have a government backing, per se, in Judges. So, try to make it's like we had a government with a Supreme Court and nothing else. We didn't have the other two branches.
About what we got now.
Well, there are people who are falling back on the Supreme Court,
Yeah.
okay, in order to do things that they couldn't legislate, okay, and there are executives relying on the Supreme Court to do things that the executives haven't gotten away with for a while. Okay? So I like it. Frankly, I like it because we're just getting into this. And what we are finding is our country is having great debates. These are the kind of debates that our founding fathers got into when they started forming the Constitution. And it's good for us to look at what we consider to be legal and whether or not those laws are effective or good or just, okay? Whether or not those laws actually violate other laws. Sometimes we pass laws that are unconstitutional. Sometimes there are executive orders that are unconstitutional. Sometimes people act regardless of what the law may be because they can get away with it. Okay? So we're finding that judges are doing that, and we're finding that there are people in the executive branch who are doing that from time to time, and we're seeing that there are legislators who think that they are above the law. Okay? And these are the conversations that we are being forced to engage in today, which is great. That's what we should be doing. Because there are questions that need to be resolved. And the fact that we didn't ask them before has led to the kind of anarchy in some cases that we see in the book of Judges. So it's important for us to have these debates. Now, we were talking last week about who wrote the book of Joshua, okay? And my wife has been asking me, okay, I just want to know who wrote it. I just want to know who wrote it, okay? Well, to me, it's not important who wrote it, okay? What is important is who commissioned it and what was it being used for. Now, I'll tell you, one of the dilemmas that we preachers have is we've got to prepare sermons from stuff like this, okay? And so one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to go to the commentaries and take a look at what great scholars have thought of these passages and how they interpreted them. And I have to tell you, and I'm a graduate of Duke Divinity School, which is one of the preeminent divinity schools and seminaries in the country. And some people think it's too liberal, and in some areas it truly is, okay? But at the same time, I'm glad I went to a school that challenged me. I'm glad I went to a school that made me ask questions about what I believe, and to review it and to look at it. And preachers go to commentaries to find out how these scriptures are interpreted by people who have spent their entire lives examining them and trying to figure it out, okay? And one of the things that I appreciated about Duke Divinity School was that while it is Methodist affiliated, because its board of directors is Methodist, United Methodist, at the same time, half of the professors I had were not Methodist, or even close to it. And even my Old Testament professor, who was Methodist, went to a Hebrew seminary. And he taught the Old Testament like a Jew. I loved it. I thought that was, finally I'm hearing stuff that I should hear. And this, by the way, is one of the reasons why the, perspectives that I'm taking in many cases may be different from what you typically hear from a purely Christian background, okay? But something you have to bear in mind as well is that these are religious scholars who are giving you the interpretation from a religious point of view in the commentaries, okay? Very few of these religious scholars have a background in geopolitics. Very few of them have a background in, military heritage. And my background is as an intelligence officer helps me to ask more questions than what the religious scholars present. What were the geopolitics of what was going on when these books were written? It is important to know what David was trying to accomplish with the book of Joshua. It is important to know why Josiah not only used the book of Joshua, but probably had some pretty strong editorial insertions. And how do you know that there are editorial insertions? Well, some of these scholars that examined these scriptures back in the 1800s were German. And what the Germans did was really unique, and they came under terrible criticism for it, but they were critical of the Bible. I'm not talking about being critical in terms of disagreeing with. They're critical in terms of taking a look at it from a standpoint that was not purely religious. See, one of the problems is that you have, like for instance, the Roman Catholic Church was dominant, okay? And whatever the Pope said, that's what it was. And the Roman Catholic Church traditionally did not want its parishioners to necessarily read the Bible freely. They wanted that always to be interpreted through the priest, you know, and the teachings of the Catholic Church first. And what the Germans did, because that was the home of the Protestant Reformation, was to look at the Bible in a multifaceted way. They looked at it from the standpoint of history. They looked at it from the standpoint of literature. Like for instance, I got a birthday card, okay? And the birthday card that I got was signed by a bunch of different people. Well, guess what? They were all signed with a different kind of handwriting. So I know that that wasn't an auto pen. All right? They actually did sign that. Okay, so what the Germans did was they took a look at the way words were used and the way sentences were constructed, and they found that there were changes in the styles of writing as you go through the books. And so all of a sudden you realize, hey, we've got a different set of editors here. And you find this style of writing here, and then all of a sudden it shows up 10 chapters later. And you say, well, who are those people? Well, they're priestly or Elohists or Yahwists or, you know, but they were able to identify different writing styles, just like how do they refer to God. And so they knew that this thing wasn't written by one person. It was written by an editorial board from time to time. It was changed from time to time. And I see a lot of that in the book of Joshua. I see David's interpretation of what was going on and his justification for the techniques that were used, because those were techniques that David used before he became king. Okay? And then I take a look at it from the standpoint of Josiah. And Josiah is writing in here that the people are going to fail, that they are not going to keep their promise, that they have a sacred contract with God, right? They have a sacred contract with God at the end of the book of Joshua, which they violate. And then the Assyrians come in and they take away the northern 10 tribes. And so Josiah is saying, hey, before they take away the next 2 tribes, let's fix it. And so that's why you have Josiah trying to bring people back. All of Joshua is setting the stage for a reformation that restores people to the right worship of God, and hopefully through that, the restoration of their nation. That's what Josiah had in mind. Okay, but he was assassinated before he could do that. So, and then the Babylonians came in and took over the next 2 tribes. But you want to know why these things were being written at the time, because the questions that they're trying to deal with are questions, they may have answered the question differently than we would today, but the questions are the same. Okay? Where do you stand? And I think it's important for Christians to think, again, where do you stand? Europe is heavily beset by Islamic influence now because they've let so many Muslims into their countries and into their culture. And it's beginning not only to affect the quality of life, but it's also beginning to affect their politics. And there are Europeans who are now saying, hey, wait a minute, have we gone too far with this? And do we need to come back? And you're starting to see more nationalistic ideas and Western ideas being challenged in Europe. And we're seeing some of these things being challenged in our own country today. And so some of these questions remain. Who are you going to follow? Where do you stand? And one of the things that I'm glad to see is that this younger generation is just becoming adults now, are turning back to the church. They are coming and they are reclaiming their Christianity. They are reclaiming their Western heritage. And I know the Catholic Church celebrates the fact that they're having so many more young people coming back into the Roman Catholic Church. Okay? But Protestant churches are seeing it too. And I think even in our own church, you look out on, I remember when I first came here, you look out on the congregation and weren't too many young people out there, okay? But I'm seeing more and more young people in our congregation. They're coming back. And there are people who have gone away and come back, okay? So,
I was happened to stumble over a soccer match. Right before the match. All these different players, different nationalities, but on the same team, were standing up proudly singing the country's national anthem.
yes,
And then I thought about us,
yes,
hanging our heads, refusing to do this, not coming out when the anthem's played, so on and so forth. I thought, what a contrast.
well, I think a lot of that is turning around,
Yes, but I'm getting to,
You're quite right. Yeah, we have gone through a period where it was fashionable to be anti-American. And then we started to look at what happens to societies that are anti-American. Well, they just suck. Okay, they just do. They're awful. Okay, they treat their people badly. Women have no rights in them. You start looking at what are the alternatives to what our founding fathers had in mind. Not that they were able to put it together perfectly, nor have we yet. But still, the principles upon which this nation was founded are really good, solid principles. And by and large, I'm not saying in every case, by and large, the impact of the United States on its own people and on people around the world has been more positive than any other nation's influence anywhere, more selfless than any other nation has been. And you look at some of the things that are being now done to correct imbalances in things like trade and stuff like that. We have been overly generous. After World War I, we allowed Europe to impose incredible tariffs on us. And what we did was to reduce the tariffs. Under Wilson, we reduced the tariffs and started imposing an income tax. And we did the same thing after World War II. We lowered our tariffs so that Europeans could freely trade with us and allowed them to increase their tariffs so that they could rebuild their economies that they had destroyed. Okay? But the problem was that after they recovered, they kept those tariffs and continued to punish us, or we allowed them to punish us, And so now there's a correction going on, and what we're imposing is nothing close to what has been traditionally imposed upon us by other countries. And some people say, we have these horrible high tariffs. Take a look at what other countries have been charging us on tariffs. And comparatively, even what we're adjusting to is nothing compared to what they've placed on us. So the debate's going on about whether or not these things can be imposed the way they've been imposed, but whether or not they've been imposed, I think it's timely that we're taking a look at trying to get a balance. I mean, if I'm going to open a store in Beverly Hills, I should expect to pay more for the store. It's just the way it is. Anyway, we're going to be going into the book of Judges. We're going to be looking at what happens to a society when anarchy reigns, when you don't have a good balance between religion and government, and what happens to the vulnerabilities of a country that goes through that transition. So, okay, I hope this was informative, but we'll see. We'll see you in a couple of weeks, okay? And listen, bon appetit, come on out and have a brunch with us next Sunday. God bless you all.
Thank you.
You know, judges,